Hello, my name is Cameron Davidson. I am a political science and Spanish major here at USI. I have with me Tony Greubel. He's the charge d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in Samoa. He assumed his position as Deputy Chief of Mission at Embassy Apia, Samoa, in August of 2017. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So the first question we have is, what is the impact of life in the Foreign Service on your family and personal relationships since you travel around the world so much?
Okay, the impact on my family is huge, and that's no surprise.
Yeah.
So every 2 or 3 years, if we're lucky, sometimes every year, you have to uproot your life, literally move to another country, get your kids settled in new schools, get yourself settled in a new job, at the embassy, or else back in State Department headquarters in Washington. And so because of all that, what can hurt is for your spouse, because it's hard for them to maintain a career in the Foreign Service.
Right.
Now, there are some spouses, what we call tandem couples, and so you have 2 married Foreign Service officers, and that usually works well, but it can be challenging even for them to get a job, for them both to get jobs at the same embassy.
Right.
So you have to be prepared to be separated. And there are some posts in the world, like in Iraq and Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Yemen, for example, or even Yemen, we're now closed, but we do have embassies in Afghanistan and Pakistan, Iraq still, and they're too dangerous to bring our families.
Right.
So, like, I served in Lahore, Pakistan for 1 year, and I couldn't take my family with me.
Okay.
And that's 1 year I missed out seeing my children.
Yeah.
I got 2 short trips back to see them, but it's hard on your life in some ways. But the positives about this, though, so the positives are your kids, your children, your whole family, you're exposed to different cultures, and they often really love that. My kids at least really loved it. They made friends literally from all over the world. Your kids go to international schools. The State Department pays the tuition. Most of the international schools, the education is it's world class. They have kids from, English is normally the language of instruction, but kids are from all over, European countries, Asian countries, etc. From the expatriate and diplomatic community going to those schools.
Right.
And also everyone's used to being what we call a nomad. So these kids, they show up at the new school, and what's good about it is probably 1/3 of the school's turned over. So it depends, but they're not the only new kids that are showing up on the first day of school. They're not the only new kids there.
Okay.
And so it's been a really interesting life experience for my children. I think it was healthy for them.
Yeah.
And my wife, she sacrificed her career as a secondary school teacher. She used to teach at USI. She was the first Japanese language teacher here. But she sacrificed her career because of me joining the Foreign Service, and I always keep that in mind, appreciate her for doing that.
Right.
But she also personally has really enjoyed all the different countries we've lived in.
Right.
And we've enjoyed all of them.
Yeah, that's great. So I understand your wife is a published author. So does she, as you travel, does she continue writing different pieces? Is that kind of how she fills her time? Or?
Well, you know what? She just became a published author about 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's something that she finally wrote a book after she had always been thinking about doing this ever since the 1990s. And then a few years ago, she finally said, you know what, I'm not getting any younger, my mother's not getting any younger. It was about her mother's life.
Yeah, right.
In Northeast China during World War II. And so she said, I just need to do this, and it was a great personal accomplishment for her. We're not making any real money from it yet.
Right,
hopefully it'll be a bestseller someday, but the important thing was just to write the story.
Yeah, I mean, just to have a published book, that's incredible in and of itself.
Yes, absolutely.
So what effect does partisan politics have on your life as a Foreign Service officer?
Surprisingly, not that much.
Okay.
Because the work that we do in the Foreign Service is pretty consistent country to country, and Congress mandates a lot of reports that we write, for example, the Human Rights Report and Trafficking in Persons Report. Much of our consular work, issuing visas, helping American citizens in distress. That pretty much always stays the same, administration.
Okay.
There's always improved changes in processing for different security reasons and stuff, but that's in every administration.
Right.
And so I think what we tend to do in the Foreign Service is if there's a particular issue that we're really motivated by, that we're particularly interested in, and administration is, and there's a current administration which is starting to change our policy on that issue. You've got two choices. You can either try and work in that issue, try and get an assignment working directly on that issue, so you can use whatever influence you can to try and convince the administration. We don't set policy, but our job is to advise, make recommendations. Sometimes we're listened to, sometimes we're not. But so you can try that, and if they don't listen to you, that's fine. You've done your job. That's our job, is to make recommendations. But often it's usually the best just work on another issue.
Okay.
During that period.
Right.
So if you think if you're not going to be happy in that position, if you disagree with our policy on this particular area of the world under current administration, just bid on other jobs.
Okay.
And work in another region.
Yeah. Okay. So what would be the biggest warning or advice you would give to someone who is thinking about becoming a Foreign Service officer?
Okay, so the warning is kind of related to the family question. It's more, you need to be prepared to constantly be moving every 2 or 3 years. And so, to me, the best part about the job is really doing something different. I often tell people, so as I said, every 2 or 3 years I'm going to a different assignment, but I'm not only moving, but I might be doing something totally different. So it really is like having a different job, because especially in a Foreign Service generalist, we have a wide range of duties. At a really big embassy, we're back in the Department of State headquarters, we're usually working on one narrow, specific portfolio. But at a smaller embassy, like I'm in Samoa, you have to be more of a jack of all trades.
Okay.
And so that makes your day a little more interesting, because you're never doing the same thing all the time.
So from day to day it changes, like what you do?
Absolutely.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so some days I'm more in Samoa, I'm more focused on internal management issues in the embassy, doing more HR work or management work. Other days I'm on the visa line, helping people get their facilitating travel to the U.S. Or else helping American citizens in distress. Other days I'm writing cables back to Washington on some political issue that I think gets interest there.
Yeah, so can it be difficult to balance all these different things that you have to do? Wow.
Yeah, and there's always people wanting in Washington thinking, they're sending you emails, we need you to do this, and it's like, okay, that's fine, but I've also got 10 other emails from other people in Washington asking me to do the same thing.
Wow.
You balance yourself out.
Right. Wow.
And sometimes you need to go back to people and say, I've got a lot of competing deadlines, I'll do my best. Yeah. Okay. In my job, I've learned if I try and be a perfectionist, I'm going to kill myself.
Okay.
So sometimes you just need to accept the fact that you're going to do a good enough job in some portfolios, and then other times and other issues that are coming up, you need to be a little more perfect in. You just need to use the balance on what's most important at that time.
So what about the advice for people?
So the advice is be flexible, be adaptable.
Okay.
Because, when many people wanting to be a Foreign Service officer, they think, okay, I want to get hired and negotiate arms control treaties with the Russians,
Right.
That's what my master's thesis was on. I'm the expert in that field, and you probably are, but that's not the way it works.
Right, yeah.
So the Foreign Service, in many ways, is like the U.S. Military Officer Corps. It's a system where we have different ranks. We have to be promoted at a certain point. Every certain number of years you have to be promoted, or else you will be forced out. And so the Foreign Service career actually is more about a person making a career in the Foreign Service doesn't normally work, even if they're hired right out of college. Normally doesn't work 40 years. It's more of a 25 to 30-year career.
Okay.
That's typical in Foreign Service because of the way the upper route system is. Usually you're not going to, because of the time in class and all that stuff, only some of us are going to make it to the very top. There's only so, just like in the military, there's only so many generals and so many admirals.
Right. That
often when you're the equivalent of a colonel, lieutenant colonel, you have to retire.
Gotcha.
So the Foreign Service is that way. We have what's called Foreign Service 01, Foreign Service 02. I'm a Foreign Service 02. I'm the equivalent to a lieutenant colonel in the Army.
Okay.
You know, and I have to be promoted in a few years, otherwise I'll be forced to retire. Okay. If I am promoted, I can work until I'm about for another 8 years or so after that, and then I have to get into senior Foreign Service, which is the equivalent of generals.
Right. So I know you've been in Samoa since August of 2017, correct? Mm-hmm. So how long have you been in Foreign Service in general?
I joined the Foreign Service in September of 2002.
Okay, so it's been about
almost 17 years.
Almost 17 years. Wow. Okay. So then I guess our final question is, what are the benefits of working in Foreign Service?
Okay. The benefits are free language training. Mm-hmm. So the Foreign Service, you don't even have to test out in a foreign language to join the Foreign Service. It helps you.
Right.
and I do recommend anyone who's interested, become proficient in foreign language. But if you're not proficient, don't let that stop you taking the test, because you will learn even if you're proficient, they're going to teach you other languages. And if you're not proficient, they still think you're going to be a good Foreign Service officer, they're going to hire you.
So how many languages are you like fluently able to speak in?
Fluent? The Foreign Service taught me Indonesian and Chinese.
Oh, wow, okay.
I actually had 2 years of Chinese language training. Mm-hmm. I had 6 months of Indonesian language training.
Yeah.
Chinese is so much harder that I actually felt my Indonesian was better.
Really?
After only 6 months.
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, Chinese is a whole different alphabet, symbols, everything's just different.
Absolutely.
But wow.
So those are the only 2 languages I've learned in the Foreign Service.
Okay. And do you have like a basic kind of foundation in other languages that kind of help you communicate, or do you just not really use other ones that much?
So in Samoa, most people speak English. Samoan is really the first language of the country. Mm-hmm. But the State Department doesn't think I need to know that to do my job, and I think that's correct. Okay. So I don't think there's any reason to put my position in Samoan language training for a year. Indonesia, you had to know Indonesian, and in China, you did have to learn, at least be proficient in Chinese, if not fluent. Mm-hmm. In Latin America, you definitely need to know Spanish. But Spanish is considered, usually we can become proficient in Spanish after 6 months of training, and then once you get on the job, so it's not so bad. Okay. But the one thing though, as you progress in your career, it can be harder to get foreign language training, because by the time you get to a certain rank, it's expected that you already know a certain number of languages. So at this point in my career, for me because I took a little bit of Spanish in high school and stuff, but I'm not proficient in it. And at this point in my career, the State Department is probably not going to teach me Spanish. Right. So if I wanted to serve in Mexico or anywhere else in Latin America or Spain, it would be difficult to get that job. Mm-hmm. Right. So as you're going throughout your career in the Foreign Service, what you want to do is look ahead at what region of the world you want to work in. You need to, what they call, major in one area of the world, and then minor in another. So like there's 2 geographical regions where usually you want to become either through a combination of language training, a knowledge of the political and economic factors in the country, be reasonably be more or less an expert in 2 different parts of the world. Right. So for me, I like the East Asia Pacific region. Okay. And then I've also served in Canada, and in Pakistan and stuff.
So when you were going into it, did you get to choose like what region you wanted to focus on, or did they just kind of tell you,
So when you're in the Foreign Service, the good thing is, so when you are hired, or before you're hired, you have to agree that you will be available for worldwide assignment, and they mean that. Yeah. So you can't negotiate. You can't say, well, because of family considerations, I'm only willing to go to Western Europe. And they'll say, well, they're going to rescind your job offer.
Yeah.
So, so how it is, the Foreign Service has, when you're looking for positions, there's a list, there's openings. You see what positions are available, and then you look at early in your career, you have the entire world available, and then that's kind of a time to decide, okay, what language, like this is maybe a great time to learn Spanish if I want to serve in Latin America. If you're interested in Africa, French would be good because there's lots of Francophone countries in Africa.
Right.
So same thing with Chinese. Maybe this is the time to get at least 1 year of your Chinese language training and serve in China.
Yeah.
So so you look at that in your career, and you just basically you tell your career development officers who assigned you for your first as a junior officer, entry-level officer. They tell you, you tell them, you give them input. This is where I want to go, and here's why. You can also include family reasons for that, and all of us have different interests. You know, in my orientation class, we all got assignments that we actually wanted to go to. Not necessarily our first choice, but all of us got, I think, our top 5 choices.
Yeah. Wow, that's great.
Because we all have different interests.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we?
I really do want to say the Foreign Service is it's a great career. I've enjoyed it. It's worked out well with my family. Another option, if you're interested in foreign policy issues, but perhaps either because of spousal reasons, because of career for your spouse, or maybe just you in general interest in foreign policy but don't necessarily want to uproot your life every 2 or 3 years. There's a lot, the State Department also has civil service positions, including professional positions. So there's a lot of what we call foreign affairs officers who are working in Washington on wide range of foreign policy issues. And they do a lot of travel for international meetings and consultations, but so you do get travel, but you're mostly living in Washington. And so the Foreign Service, so the State Department, we do have Foreign Service and we have civil service positions. There's different hiring processes for them, and the best way to get information on those is to go to the State Department website, www.state.gov, or just choose careers.state.gov. Okay. And you learn, that's the best way to get the details on the hiring process for both. Okay. They are different. There's also usajobs.gov, especially for the civil service positions. And besides the State Department, if you're interested in foreign policy, there's the Department of Defense has a lot of civilian positions. They're dealing with foreign policy issues, and many people are also interested in intelligence issues. So yeah, I would recommend, don't only look at State Department, look at all the other agencies. There's also Department of Commerce has the Foreign Commercial Service, where their job is to go work in embassies overseas, but their job is to promote American exports to those countries. Okay. And then the Foreign Agricultural Service, their job is to help American farmers sell their products overseas. Wow, okay. So, there's 3 foreign services. There's State Department, and then, along with Commerce and Agriculture. And then wide range of U.S. government agencies besides State Department are involved in foreign policy issues. Okay, wow. And usajobs.gov, just look at that. You see available positions, and it'll tell you what qualifications they're looking for. So that will give you an idea in your education and other work experience. If you can't get hired in that right away, you can say, okay, what are they looking for? And then you might be able to get your first entry. If it's not your dream job, you might be able to get your first job out of college, and something that will actually help build you with the relevant experience to qualify for those jobs in a few years later. Wow, okay. Well, thank you so much for that advice. And thank you so much for answering all these questions that we have. Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. Awesome.